to call to order the December 10th, 2020 Board of Adjustment meeting. Could I get a roll call, please?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ford,
Here.
Oletsky,
Present.
Culhane,
Here.
Spire, okay, Spire is going to be absent this evening. Hanson,
Here.
Kays, Kays, okay, Brink,
Here.
okay. We have 5.
We have 5, so we have a quorum.
We do have a quorum.
Yep. Okay. I'll move on to item 3 of the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the November 5th meeting. Could I get a motion and a second for discussion?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Ford
Culhane.
seconds.
I have a motion and a second. If there's no further discussion, I'll ask for a roll call vote.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ford,
Yes.
Oletsky,
Yes.
Culhane,
Yes.
Hanson,
Yes.
and Brink.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries.
All right, thank you. Moving on to 4, the regular agenda. 4A is board consideration of a conditional use request for a bar/tavern in the C3 Highway Commercial District on property located at 137 5th Avenue Northeast. Stacy, would you take over?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. The applicants have applied for a conditional use permit for a bar tavern on this specific property. They are the new owners of the former Foxy's Bar and Grill, and they would like to continue using the property as a bar tavern, but also add a gaming establishment. The owners have been working with the city on an interior remodel permit and a liquor license application. They are anticipating making interior and site improvements to the property. The bar tavern is defined as any establishment, including restaurants and gaming establishments, licensed to sell alcoholic beverages for consumption upon the premises where sold or provided. The term bar or tavern shall also include establishments licensed to sell alcoholic beverages for consumption off the premises where sold. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Requests like this, every time it changes owner, they have to come back to the board for the conditional use. Is that correct?
Usually, yes. In this particular case, we did some historical research, and we did not find a conditional use for Foxy's. I understand it had operated for a number of years, and we weren't able to locate an original conditional use, so that did trigger it.
And there's no variances being requested. It's just a conditional use. There's no parking or any variances requested, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
This is Ford. I am curious about the parking that would be required for this establishment.
So I'm going to let the owners speak to that because they are going to look at striping their parking, I believe, and kind of reconfiguring it. They did take down an old canopy that was located on the site. So I'm going to let the applicant speak to that because it's not exactly changing the use because the bar tavern and a gaming establishment is covered under that definition. We haven't, pressed the parking issue at this point in time, but that is something that I'm going to turn over to the applicants.
Okay, with that, I will open the public hearing so that the applicant can come forward, and please state your name for the record. Thank you.
We know the parking has been somewhat of a concern in the past, so we're working with the parking lot company to figure out the best layout we could do for the parking lot to make sure it flows better than it did before. First thing we did was remove that big canopy from the old gas station, which basically sat right in the middle and made it more difficult to keep the parking organized. So we think that'll make a difference. And then we will stripe the parking lot to accommodate the maximum parking that we can fit on the lot.
Isn't there a city-owned property or a parking lot somewhere across the road too?
Not that I know of.
I'm asking Stacy, I'm sorry.
I'm not aware of it either. Do you guys know of one?
I'm not
Randy or
sure,
Heath?
you know, because you got that power plant and then they have to,
Is it maybe that?
I'm not sure. I'm just wondering who owns that? Is that owned by Davis?
Yeah, that's privately owned.
This is Ford again. Stacy, I'm wondering how many spots are required by ordinance for a business of this size that also has a restaurant?
They would not be having a restaurant. It would
Oh, all
only
right.
be a
Thank you.
bar, tavern, and gaming establishment. And I'm going to ask Brandy or Heath to run those numbers, please. And we'll get you that, Commissioner Ford, in just a moment.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
It looks like you've been doing a lot of work in there. Totally gutted the whole thing, is that what I hear?
Yes, it's been a project so far, for sure. We had the old original gas station ceilings, which were about 7.5 feet tall, and yeah, it'll be quite a transformation, for sure.
I can hardly wait to see it.
So the parking requirement for their use, which would be, it falls into the restaurant, lounges, arenas, theaters, assembly halls, would be 1 per 3 seats. So when they submit their building permit plans, or their plans for their building permit application, then we'll review that and make sure that it's sufficient.
So what we're looking at today isn't necessarily, do they have enough parking? That'll come when the building plans come to you guys. Right now, what we're looking at as this board is this ground suitable for the conditional use that's being requested, which is a bar and a tavern, assuming no variances are needed then?
We do expect this to be a little bit lower volume as the restaurant use, I understand, at this point in time is going to be discontinued.
Are there any other questions for the applicant, or is there anyone else here to speak on behalf or against, or anyone online to speak in favor or against this application? Seeing none and hearing none, I will ask for a motion. Well, first I'll close the public hearing and I'll ask for a motion from the board.
I'd like to make a motion to approve application.
Mr. Chair, Kay's here. I'll second. And I have a question for the city attorney.
Go ahead, Mr. Case.
Matt, I know historically the city of Watertown, it seems to be on these bar and taverns, when we issue the conditional use permit, we're issuing it to the person. Is there anything problematic with issuing the conditional use permit for a bar and tavern to the property, therefore making it transferable to subsequent owners of the property, as long as they, get their city liquor or beer license? It would be just we've made the determination that it's okay to sell beer and wine or whatever at this location. Why do we need to revisit it every 3, 5, 7, 10 years down the road when it's only a change of ownership? It's no different than once we've determined that this one location is adequate for a gas station and I sell the gas station, as long as I'm complying with all the rules and regulations for a gas station, I don't need to come in and have, it's more of a licensing thing to me. Is that, and if there's no problems with that, could we make that as an amendment to the motion?
Well, I guess my first question is, I thought that that's what we did, unless the property ceased being used for a bar tavern for a period of 1 year.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's why I was just curious. I mean, if that's our practice, then do we need to make that as part of a motion? Because I don't know if that's by ordinance or is that just something that's just implied?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may. Going back, and I apologize, Commissioner Kays, I'm not sure if you caught some of Stacy's preliminary comments there, but she did go back in the research and there was never a conditional use permitted or issued for this particular location. But what you're describing is, from a staff's perspective, exactly how we would expect this to move forward in the future. Once a conditional use permit is issued, if it were to pass tonight, that would remain in perpetuity with that property unless that use were to have a lapse of, is it more than a year, Brandy, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then that's how we would envision this rolling out in the future.
I apologize. I missed the first part of the meeting. I was having troubles getting onto the meeting, so I did miss those comments. So never mind.
Not a problem. Those are great questions and considerations to give here.
And I'd just also like the record to show that Kays is now part of the meeting since he missed roll call, so.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
We have a motion and a second, and it sounds like we don't need a modification or an amendment. Is there any further discussion that the board would like to have? I'll just, usually when we look at conditional uses, we look at, this type of use is generally applicable for this type of property. I mean, so it's just if there's any conditions that should need to be made, like updating parking and stuff, and which they are, which is kind of would lead me in favor of being in favor of this application.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
this is Kays again. The only other question that came to my mind was that one of the other things that we do look at when we issue CUPs is access. And the only question is, I don't know, I can't tell from this drawing, and it's been a while since I've driven by Foxy's there. Is that completely, I can access the whole, I mean, is that a curb and gutter there, or is there like 100 feet of open access to access the highway?
There's an access off of the highway, and there's also an access off of the side street to the west.
Yeah, but I didn't know, is that a rolled curve? I mean, so I can just drive out at any point, or is there actually only a single access point coming onto the highway?
To the highway, it's a curb, and to the west, it's the whole thing's open.
I think
Okay.
it's a very large entrance area, which we've had conversations with the applicant about this, and they are kind of going back to the drawing board per se on maybe rearranging the access points a little bit, and that will require a site plan that staff would review, and we will make sure that it's in compliance with the city's requirements for driveways in commercial areas for spacing and traffic safety and such.
Yeah, I assume that was the case. That was just the one thing I was wondering about, because I couldn't remember how that access point, and for some odd reason I thought, you could drive off and on at several spots on the highway, and if we can reduce those conflict points, that would be welcome.
Agreed.
That's a good comment. Is there any other comments or concerns? Hearing none, Stacy, I'll ask for a roll call vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Aletsky,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Hanson, Kays,
Yes?
Culhane,
Yes.
Brink,
Yes.
and Hanson. Are you with us?
Yes, I am, and my vote is yes.
Thank you so much. Motion carries.
All right. Thank you. Moving on to item 4B is board consideration of a home occupation request following the conditional use process in the R2A Single Family Attached Residential District on the property located at 208 8th Street Northwest. Stacy, will you take over?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe the applicant is going to join us online for this particular case. Heather Hedman would like to start a dog grooming business at her residence, which is located, like you said, in an R2 district at 208 8th Street Northwest. It's going to be very small in nature, and she does reside at the home. She will not have any other employees. It will just be herself. The property does have sufficient space to park up to 2 additional vehicles in the driveway. And there is a list of criteria associated with the home occupation. It's up on the screen, but I'm not going to go through all of it. I did go through this with the applicant, and she does not sense that there would be any issues meeting all of these requirements. And then also our regular conditional use requirements as well. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
It looks to me like they'll be able to enter from the alley and from the street too.
That's correct.
And I'd also like to open the public hearing, so if the applicant's here to speak on behalf of this, please step forward or online and let us know what you're thinking.
Hello?
Hi, Heather.
Hello?
Hi.
We can,
This is Heather. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. Was there a question?
Mr. Chair,
yes, Mr. Case.
has the applicant talked to her neighbors? Or was there any questions or concerns, any comments received from the neighbors?
As staff, we did send notice to the neighbors within 250 feet of the property, and we did not hear any comments directly about this. And I will let Heather answer the question about if she's touched base with any of her neighbors.
Thank you. I have talked with all of my surrounding neighbors. None of them have had any concerns. Most of them have animals themselves, so they're not concerned about maybe a dog barking or, and they do know that it's just me. I'll have one client in at a time. There may be one client coming and one client going. So there's no concern with parking. I have fenced in yards, so they, again, no concern with the dog getting loose or anything.
Thank you.
Heather,
You're welcome.
Heather, do you have plans on keeping any of the animals overnight, or is it just they come and they get groomed and then they go back to their home?
At this point, while I'm in my home, I will only be grooming, so they will come and go. I do have a few like travel kennels, so if I have a client that calls and says, hey, I'm running late, can you keep my dog for an hour? I do have kennels where the dogs will be safely in there, but it won't be an overnight situation. This is going to be a temporary situation as well. I do plan on looking at facilities to get into a commercial building.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, gotcha.
And do you
Mr.
have?
Chair,
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Case.
for the applicant again, so
Thanks,
just
Steve.
confirming, you're looking at having one client, one animal at a time. At the worst case situation is you maybe would have less than 3 dogs there due to, clients having to come after work or something like that.
Exactly, yes.
Thank you.
I don't plan on keeping dogs for a long period. However, I know things happen. So if someone happens to run late, I may have a dog in a kennel and one on my table, vice versa.
Thank you for that. And I have one more question for you, Heather. Do you plan or anticipate having any employees working there with you?
No, at this time it is just me. I don't plan on getting any employees until I can get into a commercial spot.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions that any board members have for the applicant? Or is there anyone else that wishes to speak on behalf or against this application? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing and ask for a motion from the board.
I'll make a motion to approve the application.
Ford seconds.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask for a roll call vote, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kays,
Yes.
Hanson,
Yes.
Culhane,
Yes.
Oletsky,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
and Brink.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to item 4C is board consideration of a variance request to the zoning ordinance requirements related to proposed improvements on the property located at 192 North Lake Drive. Stacy, will you take it away?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a variance request. This applicant would like to replace a detached garage with an attached garage. I'll try to bring up a map here. Okay, here's the site plan. And here's an aerial map that shows what is existing today. The proposed attached garage will be located in the same location as this current detached garage, with an estimated side yard setback here showing from 5.3 to 7.5 feet. And the R1 district does require a 9-foot side yard setback. In this case, the degree of nonconformity will essentially remain the same. The property does have a slight irregularity in the shape, and other properties in the lake vicinity have been granted some variances such as this when nonconforming structures are placed within the same location. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that. And I'll also open the public hearing if anyone wishes to speak on this topic.
The garage has been removed, the detached garage. But the concrete's still there, but it's going to be right up to the house? Is that what they're talking about? Okay.
Yes. And I believe that they are going to have, here's an actual sketch, so they would like to have living area as well above, I believe. And this is really hard to see. That didn't come out very good. But you can see there's a detached garage here, and that's the home.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Case.
has the applicant talked to the adjoining landowner on 190 North Lake Drive? And has that landowner stated any problems with the existing current situation that we're aware of?
Stacy, have you heard any comments from the adjacent landowners?
I have not heard any comments. Again, this did go out to landowners within 100 or 250 feet rather of the subject property, and I have not received any comments.
The applicant just came online too, if he can speak to that at all, but Stacy's correct that we haven't received any feedback from the letters we sent out.
Steve's online.
Hello.
Hi, Steve.
Yes.
This is Todd Kays. I have a question. Have you
Yes, Todd.
have you had any problems with your neighbor regarding the encroachment of your existing garage close to their property? Does he have any concerns, or does she have any concerns with you replacing it in the same location? Have you had that conversation?
Yeah. Yeah, yes, we've had conversation with her and her family. Her family kind of oversees the property now, and they have no concerns with it.
Thank you.
Hey, Steve, how much of an overhang are you going to have on that proposed addition garage? Because it's going to be so tall. Are you going to have rain gutters and stuff so the overhang stays in your yard?
Yes, we will put gutters on it, correct. I don't know how far, I don't know how far the overhang is gonna be. We haven't quite finalized that yet.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
Fire Marshal Chip, I just want to let the applicant know that, with the distance between the two buildings, after we see his plans and stuff, that he might have to do some firewall, beef up some things for firewall on his property. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Chip.
Okay, thank you.
Stacy, this is Ford. What's the house and the garage will now be attached?
Yes.
Originally, that's an open area. What's the distance between the house and where the standalone garage was, that sidewall of that garage?
That's a good question. It'll take me just a moment. Perhaps the owner can answer that question while I'm looking on the mapping system.
I think it's about 8, I believe it's about 8 feet between.
8 feet between the sidewall of the house and the sidewall of the original garage?
Correct, yep.
So it's possible to attach the garage and build this garage and come in compliance with the 9-foot setback by moving that, I'm going to say, east wall farther onto your property.
But then the garage, we want the garage, otherwise we don't feel there's enough space in the garage. We'd like that extra 2 feet, otherwise there's not enough space to put stuff when you get like in and out of your car and stuff. You'll be banging your doors there. So that's why we'd like the extra 2 feet.
So, Steve, what you
Yeah,
want to have,
it's gonna be a double garage.
but the garage is going to be like 27 feet, right? Wide?
Yeah, 20,
Okay.
yeah, 27 to 20, yep.
Okay. That's normal for a 2-stall.
So it's not exactly quite in the same location then, because you're adding that area, that alleyway between the garage and the house. You'd still be able to have a garage. It might not be the garage you want if you moved that east wall so that you did have the 9-foot setback on your yard.
Yeah, but I mean, that does not affect our neighbor. I mean, they don't have any problem with it.
Well, I understand that, but part of the granting a variance talks about if you have reasonable use of your property, granting a variance comes into play when you don't have reasonable use. So that's the balancing act I'm talking about right here. We could get the 9-foot setback. You could have a garage. It may not just be exactly the garage that you desire to have. You'd still have a reasonable garage.
Yeah,
Chair.
yeah, I guess so, yeah. But,
Chair,
yeah, I don't know if we're gonna build if we, yeah, but then it's gonna be tight in there and I don't think we'd do a double garage then, so. But,
A 22-foot wide garage is so very, very narrow, and they don't have a basement for any other storage that it just, I don't know. I think a 28-foot garage or a 27-foot garage makes more sense.
I think from a staff standpoint, we figured they could go close to 24 feet without a variance. And I did just pull up this site plan again, and you can see it's not the exact location perhaps, but you can see the dash line was the existing, and then the bold line here is the new, so it's very, very close from what we received.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Case?
I'm just looking at where it says 5.3. It appears to me, based on the drawing, that the lot kind of tapers and becomes more narrow the closer it gets to the water. Is that correct, or am I reading that wrong?
No, that is correct. The lot does have a slight irregularity
So there
in the
is there's
shape.
a unique feature to this lot that's different than other standard rectangular lots. It's more pie shaped.
yeah, Darwin Brinkman was the engineer and he says it's about 91 on the roadside and then it tapers back to 76 on the lakeside approximately.
And is there anyone else in the public that's here to speak on behalf of this item?
I'm Brian Brander here. I also live at the lake. I'm not really here to speak on it. I know lake property has gotten extremely expensive. They've had this same property line for some years. Obviously, they're fine with it. By today's standards, this may have been a cabin at one point, but the lake has gotten very popular, so more of these cabins are going to turn into full-time housing. So I'm sure Steve doesn't want to build basically a single stall garage when everybody in town's wanting 3 or 4. I kind of feel like maybe this is a time to give him his 2-stall. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would kind of agree with what Stacy said at the beginning, where sometimes this board has felt that if the addition or the new building is going over the old, it's already got the cement in place, the concrete's already there, so we've been a little bit more have the tendency of granting those, and it looks like the outer wall or the eastern wall will be going in the same spot, and the encroachment will be the same.
And the applicant also said he would have no problem doing the firewall or the rain gutters or watching all of that, keep his stuff on his water on his own property.
Yes, we would definitely do that. We agree to that.
This is Brandy. I just wanted to reiterate that it's been our practice or the past few applications we've had for variances at the lake. If they have not been encroaching further into the setback, we have been granting those. And I think that is something to look forward as the Plan Commission to maybe just get that in ordinance. And as we always talk about creating the Lake Residential District, that is something that would most likely be implemented as those are existing structures that have been there for years. And so they're just trying to update them. And so if they're still maintaining that setback, it doesn't seem to be an issue.
Is there anyone else from the public that wishes to touch on this item? Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion from the board.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson, Brandy, can you revisit, when I look at the drawing for the completed project, it's going to show a deck off the second floor. Remind me how that will affect encroachment or setback. Is it the structure only, or does that deck become an issue?
So that actually, and especially it looks like it's cantilevered, and so he will have sufficient space for his front yard setback to the lake. With lakefront property, you have 30 feet from the ordinary high water mark, and so he, I don't have the contours in front of me, but I would imagine just from taking measurements around lake properties that about the middle of the sand, probably where the water's touching the sand, could be 1719, which is the ordinary high water mark elevation, or the ordinary high water elevation for Lake Compesca, and he has sufficient space. But otherwise, just that question in general, you can encroach within 5 foot of the setback with a deck in a situation like that if he didn't have the space, but that should be fine.
Perfect, thank you.
Yep.
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Second, Colleen.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
Chair,
Yes.
I'd just like to reiterate a little bit. I think it was maybe Brandy was talking about it. A lot of these regulations are designed for our residential areas in town, and we're kind of trying to shoehorn them into these this entire lake district. And obviously, these lake properties, by their very nature, are different because of the way they came about. You know, they were built originally outside, a lot of them outside of the city, then annexed later. They've got different sized lots. It's goofy. So to hold strict standards to them that we use for our, residentially platted lots inside of the city proper just doesn't seem like it makes sense in all instances. So that's the only comment I want to make.
Thank you for those. Any other comments?
Yes, this is Ford. I agree totally with what Mr. Culhane said. However, we have the ordinances in front of us, and they're pretty specific about a variety of criteria that we're supposed to use to make these decisions. I understand that it's very difficult to apply the city proper ordinances to the lake, and so I would really hope that these issues come up time and time again at the lake, that we would be seeing a residential lake ordinance coming that the board can use, and that residents at the lake also have as a tool to use when they're trying to plan changes to their property. I'm frustrated with the situation that I find myself in. As you guys probably know, a relatively black and white person, and it's very difficult for me to say, this is the way I wish it were, which is in fact the case, when I don't see anything in the ordinance except what it says in black and white. So let's get a residential lake ordinance going.
Absolutely agreed.
And truly, the reason I brought this up was to just have this kind of discussion, to just point out once again how difficult it is for the board and for lake residents to try to make appropriate decisions for these kinds of activities.
Yes, and staff agrees with that too, and we have been working on it. we'll try to focus more time to it. What does make it nice is looking back at past variances to kind of get an idea of what we think is acceptable for a baseline of creating that district, because it will be time consuming and difficult. We'll want plan commission input, developers, lake resident, whoever we can get on a committee, a subcommittee looking into it like we did for the lake commercial district. So, but we would like to move forward with that too, Diana, and I thank you for urging us to get that done.
Yes, thank you, Diana. This is Stacy. I just wanted to comment as well that I do see that, as Brandy indicated, being a committee process, and we would like to get that started in hopes that we could avoid some of these conversations in the future, perhaps for the next building season.
That would just be wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for your input on that.
Thank you, Diana.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just add to that discussion too. Wholeheartedly agree with Commissioner Ford and everybody's sentiments on the need for that residential lake district. One thing too that I would offer up that staff and I could explore looking at, and perhaps drafting something, a tool in the toolbox that I think, to Diana's point, that the board may find useful is language in the ordinance that's specific to variances for existing nonconformities. And I've seen other communities allow a lot more flexibility when it comes to issuing variances that aren't expanding on a nonconformity, like in this case, where we're not encroaching further into the setback than what was already existing and had been existing for some time without a variance having been issued, whether it was a grandfather situation that existed prior to the adoption of the ordinance, or whatever the case might have been. We have a lot of nonconformities that exist today, and people oftentimes come in to rebuild something and don't want to enlarge that encroachment or further hinder the situation. Just throwing out other ideas though too, not to put aside the lake residential district that I know we need, but also thinking of another tool in the toolbox or some other language that we could have. That way there's more black and white to look at and for consideration. So.
Yeah, and I think the board would really appreciate that tool as well. I mean, like Commissioner Colhane said, I mean, a lot of these properties were built before they came into the city, and we have a lot of properties in the middle of our town that were built before ordinances as well, so that we're hard to have a lot of variances. So I think that would be a very useful tool.
And Mr. Chair, this is Kays. I think the proper nomenclature is a non-standard use as opposed to a non-conforming use. And there's a plethora of examples out there on how to allow this to happen, even to the point where it doesn't even need to be a variance, but more of a special permitted use sort of a deal.
Sounds like we have someone for the committee. Is there any other comments? We do have a motion and a second. Are there any additional comments from the board? Hearing none, I will ask for a roll call vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colhane.
Yes.
Oletsky.
Yes.
Ford.
Yes.
Kays.
Yes.
Hanson.
Yes.
And Brink.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you. Moving on to item 4D, board consideration of a conditional use request of a bar/tavern in the C3 Highway Commercial District on property located at 2803 8th Avenue Southeast. Stacy, will you take it over?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a conditional use again for a bar tavern. This is for the newly constructed Holiday Inn Express. They would like to sell malt beverages and wine in their gift shop. And that does necessitate a bar tavern conditional use for the off-premise sales portion. The definition is shown in your packet as well as up on the screen, and it does include to sell alcoholic beverages for consumption off the premises where sold. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So they aren't going to have a bar in the hotel?
No, we do not believe so.
But if we granted this conditional use, they could
That is
build
correct.
a bar and have that there if they so chose.
That is correct, unless there is specific provisions for not allowing that type. But yes, generally yes, they would be able to if this were to be granted.
And I'll open the public hearing in case the applicant is here to speak on behalf, or if anyone else is here to speak on this issue.
This is Brandy. I think too, when you guys are looking at this conditional use, applying it as if it could potentially be a bar, just because once they have it, they can change it into that. It is zone C3 highway commercial, so that's where we typically see them as well.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Case.
I'm trying to just envision, do most of the bars in the city of Watertown, I mean, I know the city of Watertown has seems to me, restrictive policies when it comes to off-sale beer and alcohol type sales. Do we have a history of putting these types of off-site, off-use licenses in places that aren't liquor stores or gas stations?
I'm not sure. I'm going to have to refer that to Brandy if she may have some additional information.
I don't recall either, and I was actually wondering maybe if, Matt, are you aware? We'll just keep passing the buck.
Can you repeat the question, Todd?
I guess the question is, I mean, I know the city of Watertown, we don't allow grocery stores to sell alcohol. We allow it to happen in gas stations and certain bars and those types of things. But I mean, can I go out to the event center and buy a 6-pack to go out at the Ramcota? I mean, is this something that's common that we normally do throughout the city?
So whether we issue off sale at non-bar locations, is that the question?
Yeah. I mean, if they're not going to have a bar, but they're just going to have a gift shop and they're selling beer, is that any different than I decide I open a shop and I want to sell beer?
Just trying to think. One that comes to mind off the top of my head is the Redland Arts Center that sells gift bottles of wine, alcohol in their gift shop. Again, that's the only one that comes to mind that would be similar.
But let me just take it's more of an esoteric, larger, nebulous discussion. Theoretically, then any commercial use that's allowed in the C3 zone could turn around and come in and ask for an off-sale license.
I'm not understanding the question, Todd.
I guess the question is that, I'm not having a big problem with it, but I know we have restricted certain, does it have to be a bar tavern license to be able to sell off-sale license, or can I just get an off-sale use permit through the zoning ordinance?
Oh, my understanding is to sell off sale, there needs to be the bar tavern designation.
Okay.
And I believe they are applying for a liquor license along with this. Is that correct, Matt, in this case for the Holiday Inn Express?
I believe that's correct. Yes. But yeah, my understanding is historically that the bar tavern was also used for the sale of off sale. So you couldn't sell off sale without the bar tavern designation granted by the board.
So if County Fair wanted to come in and apply for a bar tavern license, then they would be able to sell liquor and beer in the store?
Yes.
Okay.
So similarly, I think fact, I think that just came up the other day, but I think that's how we've administered it in the past. So I know that prior to my time here, Target requested a license, and I believe that was declined by the city council. But I presume prior to that, the board had granted a bar tavern for Target's property, or unless the council action was contingent on board action, and that action failed. So, but yes, my understanding is historically the bar tavern is required for the sale of off sale.
I think
Thank you.
typically just from when I've been here, how it's happened is the board, they come forward to the Board of Adjustment for the bar tavern conditional use, but then the conditions are usually that there's a separate entrance. And so a lot of the times that doesn't end up working out for the businesses because it's having that extra employee and having to segregate it from their business. So I think a lot of the times they just don't move forward with it when they're combining on and off sale.
And when I look at the definition for bar or tavern, it also kind of includes the consumption on the premises where it's sold, as well as the off sale. So I mean, I feel like that's kind of what also might restrict some businesses from becoming bars or taverns, is they don't want the consumption on the business, if I'm reading that correctly.
You mean that the designation would allow their patrons to consume alcohol?
Yes, they would be, if we grant a bar or tavern, their patrons would be allowed to consume alcohol on the premises where it's sold.
Well, technically, they'd have to have the correct license that the city council is in charge of issuing in order to sell alcohol for on-premise consumption. The consumption of alcohol in and of itself is permitted at anybody's business as long as you're not selling it without a license. I mean, you don't need to, if you're an insurance agent and you want to crack a beer at 5:30, there's no prohibition for that. Now, if you start selling alcohol at 5:30, that's where the issue comes in.
So what they want to do is someone go in, buy a couple of beers, go up to their room, watch a game, and then instead of having to drive away someplace to get a beer, right?
That's correct. Or it could be a specialty bottle of wine that somebody was picking up as a gift or something. But yes.
Right. So if you see in the gift shops or in the little pantries or markets of a lot of the hotels these days, that they sell bottles of beer and little single serving boxes of wine and such. So I imagine that's what they're looking to do here.
So I couldn't go out and get a fifth of Jameson then.
Not unless they have an offset alcohol.
Okay.
Hard alcohol.
It's a joke.
Right.
And I do believe I opened the public hearing. If anyone in the audience wish to speak on this issue? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing and ask for a motion from the board for discussion.
Chair Kaye's motion to approve.
Ford seconds.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion from the board? I guess in my mind, Commissioner Kays' comments have kind of gotten me questioning. If does this open it up that other retail establishments could come in for this bar or tavern, or am I looking at this wrong?
Mr. Chair, that's kind of where I was just wondering. I mean, that's why I started coming into it, because I thought it's something unique. I understand the need to have alcohol sales on the premises for, when people are staying there. And I look at that from more of an on-site consumption standpoint. And that's why I asked the question. I think Brandy explaining it, that you have to have a separate entrance and how many other businesses are going to open themselves up to it. I think it probably would be very few, but that's kind of was the question I was wondering about.
And Mr. Chairman, I think I'll offer up too from the staff's perspective. We think, to your point, that's why the bar and tavern is conditional use everywhere, so that this board could act on where we feel it's appropriate as a community to allow on or off sale alcohol transactions. Based on the definition, you're correct. It does state in the first part of that definition that it allows a restaurant, gaming establishments, and such to be licensed to sell alcohol to be consumed on the premises. But then also the second part of it says the term bar or tavern shall also include establishments licensed to sell alcoholic beverages for consumption off the premises where sold. And so I think, to the point of the discussion here, if a barber shop or any other place like that wanted to sell off sale, my understanding is they'd have to come for the same conditional use, no matter what the retail establishment is, similar to what this hotel is pursuing tonight.
Yeah, and that's right, Heath. That's happened since I've been here. At least one, I believe two actually. In the example you gave, one was a barber shop, one was a hair salon, one was a nail salon, and the board granted this conditional use. So, yeah, I don't think anything you're doing here today is breaking any new ground. You'll still have the go-ahead anytime somebody wants to sell on or off sale anywhere in town would be approved, except with the exception of special event licenses, which we've tweaked a little bit. So.
Thank you for those comments. Are there any other comments from the board? We do have a motion and a second. Hearing none, I'll ask for a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hanson,
Yes.
Culhane,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Oletsky,
Yes.
Kays,
Yes.
Brink.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, moving on to item 4E, board consideration of a conditional use permit for a bar/tavern in the C3 Highway Commercial District on property located at 1414 9th Avenue Southeast. Stacy, I'll let you take it away.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have an application here for a bar tavern that would like to open in conjunction with a restaurant in an existing commercial plaza. It is along 212 and it is zone C3. The shopping center right now includes a mix of commercial uses, including a clothing boutique, hair salon, and some office space. And the property has a total of 59 parking spaces. So I did do a little bit more research on this one from a parking perspective, which that does equate to one space per 165 square feet. And the building is about 9,750 square feet. The ordinance requires one space per 200 square feet and one space per 3 seats for a restaurant. So once a floor plan is received, which we have not received that yet, staff will complete the final parking review. However, based on this information, the existing parking does seem to be sufficient. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are they going to do the entire building or just part of the building?
Just a portion.
Which portion?
I'm going to have the applicant come up and point that out. I believe it's a middle section here.
And I'll
Or-
open the public hearing. Go ahead.
Thank you. It would be there's 6 spaces in the building, and it'd be the 2 middle spaces. So there'd actually be 2 of them.
What were they before? That's how I remember it.
You know, I do think that they've been vacant for quite some time, and Salon 2000 is actually in one of them, but they are moving to the west to open up the 2 spaces. So Salon 2000 will move next to Bruggeman's Insurance.
And would you state your name for the record, please?
Austin Petrick?
Okay. And you're the owner of it?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Was that the one where AT&T used to be or something in that one?
Yes, well, AT&T used to be in where Rosabella Boutique, who my wife owns, moved into their space, so.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's right.
Do any and all the tenants are fine with all this and?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And then I think that same letter, I would assume, went out to them.
Yes, we did send a letter on this conditional use to property owners within 250 feet, and we have not heard any comments to this meeting.
Does the board have any other questions for the applicant? He's still standing at the podium, or is there anyone else that is here to speak on this item?
I own the property, the Cedar Square Plaza right to the east
And
there.
could I have you come up to the microphone and state your name? It's hard for people online to hear you.
Hi, I'm Brian Brandwright. I own the Cedar Square Plaza right to the east of there. And I'm not here to get in the way of progress for those guys. I'm more curious, I guess, if it's more of like a full-time bar or just like a restaurant with some alcoholic beverages. I'm probably a little concerned about the parking at the VRS building. And if it's a bar environment, if there's gonna be just some of the problems that come with a bar. But like I said, I'm not here necessarily to stand against it because, I mean, everybody wants to make money. But, so I guess if, I'd like to clarify, is it a full-blown like bar or kind of what is the nature to be?
No, it'd be a a restaurant that serves beer and wine, primarily a sports. I guess the closest comparison would be Buffalo Wild Wings. We do plan to only be open from 11 to 11, so it's not a no gaming or anything like that. So just a classic sports bar, I guess you could say.
No video lottery?
No video lottery.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Chip.
Chip Fire Marshal, I'd like to just let the applicant know that he needs to work closely with the building department and the fire department on the amount of occupants you can have in that building before a sprinkler system is required. Since it's not a very big space, if we just work closely together, he would probably not have to put any sprinklers in that building. Just keep the occupants load under 100 is what, I just want to give him a heads up on that.
Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Chip. Is there anyone else that's here to speak on this item, or is there any more questions for the applicant?
My name is Brittany Petrick, and I'm the owner of Rosabella Boutique. I'm also the wife of Austin Petrick. And in regards to what Brian Brandreed had stated about a concern for parking overflowing into VRS, is that correct? There should not be an issue. I'm there most days of the week, and I'm only open 6 days a month. And when we do have an opening, even then the parking lot is not full at capacity. So there should not be an issue to parking at all.
It looks like there's like, could have like 2 rows of parking in front of the building.
There's only 1 row of parking, but there's some closer to the road over by the sign.
Mr. Petrick, would you have a problem striping the parking lot to help people know where to park?
No, actually my current boss, James Steiger, he owns the building and we have discussed that, and so that is something that I think is in the plans to do so. Mhm.
I just have one other thing to add to. I would assume that your busiest time would probably be in the evening for this type of use, where a lot of the other businesses, the office type businesses, would likely be closed at that particular point in time, which would help free up parking spaces.
That and weekends.
Yeah.
This is Jim Steiger. I have a comment.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention too that, you know, the parking there has never been a problem for us in the past. And like you just mentioned, in the evenings is more likely to be the busier time. Also, if you notice, there's a entrance and exit both off of 14th and off of 212. And my understanding is that when 212 comes through, that the stoplight that's currently in front of the mall is going to be moved up to 14th. And so that'll make it even easier for people getting in and out of that parking lot. I also was going to mention that as far as the striping on the parking lot, we normally have always kept that striped. I've had a plan. I'm going to actually redo the entire parking lot and then put new striping in there. That plan was put on hold because of 212 coming through. It was recommended to me to not do that until 212 came through because it may change the level of the entrance from the road into the parking lot slightly. And as we all know, 212 project has been delayed and delayed. And so therefore my parking lot project has been delayed. And so that's why the striping has become a little bit deteriorated.
That makes sense.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments from the public? Hearing none, I'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion and a second from the board.
Ford moves to approve.
I'll second that motion.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I'll just add to the conversation. I believe it's the property owner that was just speaking. Is that correct? Yeah, he is accurate. The Highway 212 project, Phase 2, has been postponed a year later than the DOT had originally anticipated. Of course, Mr. Brank, as you're full well aware, but that will be commencing in 2022. And looking at the property, I'm not aware if in this area if they're requiring any more right-of-way adjacent to this property, and maybe the owner could speak to that. But if they are, I would just point out it looks like there's still plenty adequate space there for a backing aisle, that they would still retain the same number of parking stalls as they have right now if the DOT is in fact acquiring additional right-of-way. But I just wanted to point that out and maybe pose the question of whether we know it's going to be additional right-of-way acquired through there.
Right now, isn't the right-of-way, Brian, you would know this too. Right now, it looks like the right-of-way is shared by both of them. They're beside each other and, yeah.
I believe the state will be taking an additional 1.5 feet, and they're gonna wanna put a sidewalk on there as well. But it'll crowd the parking a little, but they'll still be able to have cars parked against 212 in their building comfortably, I would say. It does tighten it up a little bit because I face the same thing on my property. So it should work.
Jim Steiger, I have a comment.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, you can't see them probably on the picture, but there are striping marks there for the parking spaces. And the actual striping marks that are there will not change after the highway comes through, the new highway. We have about 9 feet between our current parking spaces and the curb. And so, what's going to happen is there's going to be a 5-foot sidewalk, and then the highway is going to get wider, but the end result is going to be our parking will not change at all. The difference being that the cars that park in their standard parking space that they have now would come up to about where the sidewalk is. And so it doesn't actually take any space away from us at all as far as backing up and turning in the parking lot.
Will you have to move your sign when they widen the highway?
So far, they have said no. It's far enough back.
Thank you for adding that information, Jim. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Any other discussion from the board? Hearing none, I'll ask for a vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Aletsky,
Yes.
Culhane,
Yes.
Kays,
Yes.
Hanson,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
and Brink.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving down on the agenda, item 4F is board consideration for a variance request to the zoning ordinance requirements related to proposed improvements at the property located at 9, 11, and 13 South Broadway. Stacy?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll get to this particular case here in a moment. Okay. Here we are. So the property owner, Workus Properties, or Workus Opportunity Properties, rather, LLC, they've submitted an application for some exterior remodel components for 3 buildings, and it is located within the downtown overlay district. That downtown overlay district was approved back on November 1st of 2019, so fairly recently. The applicant would like to do a design that staff found was inconsistent with the ordinance overlay requirements. As a side note, the properties are also listed within the Watertown Commercial Historic District, and that is part of the National Register of Historic Places, filed under the National Park Service and State Historic Preservation Office. The building located at 9 South Broadway is considered a contributing historic structure, whereas the buildings at 11 and 13 South Broadway are listed as non-contributing structures within the district. Try to get a graphic pulled up here. So this is what the applicant is proposing. It does have all of the materials that are listed over here in the percentage of the facades. And this is a graphic showing how the buildings currently exist. I believe this is number 9, and then 11 and 13, I believe. And this is the property here that is considered contributing, but all 3 properties are within the historic district. So if you take a look, this is how it would look after the proposed renovations. So staff found a couple of points as to why we considered this inconsistent, but it's up for the board's decision tonight. So the proposed exterior facade improvements have the potential to affect the character-defining features of the structure and the adjacent property in the district. As you can see, the buildings will be elevated to all 1 level, whereas it's more characteristic for a downtown to have varying building heights, some single-story, some 2-story. So elevating those to the same height is atypical for the district, and it may affect the overall massing and scale. Number 2, covering or rebuilding the facade for all buildings with drive-it antique siding, which removes and or covers historic materials that may not be compatible with the overall use of brick and stone materials within the district. So you can see some of that here. Number 3, existing facades, building trims, and cornices are proposed to be altered and replaced with more modern materials. So you can see the cornices here and all of this decorative stonework, which I'll try to get to another picture here in a moment. And number 4, the existing facades are proposed to be substantially altered from their present design and the overall design of the district. The building permit application was denied based on local ordinance and state statutes. So what we're looking at tonight is a variance from Chapter 21.5611, Building Materials. The criteria listed there is retain existing facades in the downtown district, and number 2 is maintain and restore existing facades, trim, cornices, or replace with similar replications. In addition, this is also a side note, the South Dakota Codified Law 1-19A-11.1 does require a State Historic Preservation Office review and comment process prior to the issuance of a building permit. The SHPO has requested, they have determined, we have received a letter, I should say, that and they have determined that this project has the potential to encroach upon, damage, or destroy historic properties within the district. A case report is currently being compiled by the applicant, and the city would submit that to SHPO for further consideration. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that. That was a mouthful. I'm trying to think, have we had any history of granting facade variance in the downtown historic district? I can't think of any. I don't know if you guys found any in your.
I don't believe so, but I'm going to pose that question to Brandy.
And so as far as with SHPO and their review process, I can't recall either, but in our downtown overlay district has only been in effect for a year, so we haven't came across that situation yet.
But it's been a historic district for longer than that and required SHPO approval prior to that last year. So there were still kind of the requirements before a year ago, right? And that, I don't even remember before that time us ever approving a variance to them, but I just could be mistaken.
Well, and this isn't, so the board isn't granting the variance to SHPO's requirements. That will be worked with through their review process. And the only the reason why it's in front of the Board of Adjustment is because it doesn't meet our downtown overlay district. So that's the only thing that we're actually granting the variances to. And it just for those 2 components that Stacy had stated about retaining the existing. So when we created the downtown overlay district, we had included that we wanted to retain existing facades in the downtown district and maintain and restore existing facades, trim, cornices, or replace with similar replications. And just because that would be changing with this remodel, then that's why it's in front of the board to see, I guess, what your expectations were. And this is the first situation after creating this district as well. And to get input on what exactly we foresee or what you guys think about those 2 topics.
Yeah, that particular criteria is exactly, thank you, Brandy, for further describing that for the board and for the audience as well tonight. We would like the board to take a look at that criteria. It is in 2156-11, retaining the existing facades in the downtown district and maintain and restore existing facades, trim cornices, and replace with similar replications. And that is essentially what's in front of you tonight. The applicant is requesting a variance from compliance with those 2 points listed within the ordinance.
So what the city wants them to do is to maintain them huge windows that are not energy efficient at all? Is that what we're asking them to keep?
No. No, it's basically the varying heights of the buildings. Is you can, and I wish that we could maybe get to a better graphic here, but it'll take me a minute to do that. You can see downtown districts typically have varying heights. So that is one of the things, as you can see here, this particular building could affect the massing and the scale of the entire block. So that's just something we're posing that to the board. But that's one of the things that staff noticed. So that's one of the things. The other thing is you can see that there's a lot of brick here, and there's brick here that's been painted. There's this cornice here that has some historical significance, as well as all of this decorative masonry work here. So trying to we're not even really talking about the windows in this. Those are the major components. We're talking about the materials. And then also repairing historic structures to make sure that they blend and fit with the historical character of the downtown, as was the intent, I believe, of the ordinance as it was written and adopted a year ago.
So again, on the second story part, that's what you're talking about. I'm talking about the middle building, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You want to have them so that they got to keep the glass block windows?
No, it's not anything necessarily to do with the windows. It's more
They
to,
just want them to keep the brick front, period.
yes, it's the brick. It's keeping the existing storefronts to some degree. Now, some of them can be combined, but it's just this is where it's difficult to quantify things exactly. But we felt that this was not retaining the existing facades in the downtown due to the modern design, and we felt that it was not maintaining or restoring existing facades, trim cornices, or replacing with similar replicas. As you can see, these are more modern designs. This is a red metal awning here. This is teak here. Drive It is also listed as a material, which are not common throughout the district as a whole.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, if I could expand on Commissioner Oleski's question, I would like to just point out that, and I'll only point this out because of the way the question was posed, Ms. Oleski, I don't mean it any offense towards you, but it's
none.
definitely not a staff's opinion here. It's generally a straightforward interpretation of the ordinance on how we've gotten to the Board of Adjustment. Because of the ordinance we adopted a year ago, does require the preservation of the historic nature of the downtown, we felt that the project didn't meet the terms of the ordinance as written. So that's why we then bring it forward, direct the applicant to bring it forward to the BOA for the Board of Adjustments determination if you feel as a board that it does in fact meet the terms of the ordinance. And so as staff has tried to do is explain the points that we as staff felt that it didn't meet the intent of the ordinance, and then it would be up to you as a board to decide, whether you feel it does or not, and then act appropriately, whether a variance is warranted in this particular case. And then one other point of clarity I wanted to make too in regards to SHPO, that process is still undergoing, and as Brandy pointed out, the board's not acting on giving any variance from the SHPO requirements. That's not part of the decision tonight either. I just wanted to make sure that was a point of clarity. How that will unfold is the case report that SHPO has requested will be compiled by the city staff and the applicant to provide SHPO what they need. Now, there is a situation where if this variance were granted tonight by this board, SHPO may have other requirements of the applicant that they would want to make and would make according to their reviews. If that were to happen, it would be up to the applicant how to respond, whether they would make those adjustments or not. And then if not, it would become a more pressing matter, and that's where I believe the city attorney would have to chime in on what would happen from there. But I believe that would go directly to the city council to overturn any requirements of SHPO, if it came to that. So there's a lot of things in motion here, but I just wanted to make sure it was clear to the board that tonight, simply your action is whether a variance is warranted according to the terms of the ordinance that we adopted for the downtown overlay district approximately a year ago.
Thank you, Heath.
And I will open the public hearing. If anyone's here to speak on this issue, please step forward or online.
Good evening. Chris Shilkin, Watertown Development Company. Try not to make this overly long, but so being a supporter of downtown and spearheading a lot of projects and being a fan of the overlay district that was put in place a year ago, I think this is one of the instances where you run into what the paper says and what reality sometimes is, and I think that's why it's here to figure out where we're going. So as you look at things that have transpired in downtown, I'd say up until probably the last year and a half, there probably was nobody looking to do anything, and that was part of the problem. And what we found out when we tried to recruit people to open up downtown is it's too expensive. We're not sure what we're getting into, what's really going to happen. So the development company took on buying some buildings and renovating them and leasing them out to kind of get people over their fears. Well, at the same time, of course, we've recruited high-density projects downtown that have followed the overlay district. So I think, all three that are in process now have met those requirements with a modern look, because it's really the only way to be cost-effective, and I know they've met material standards and things like that. So, which is kind of maybe ironic, as some of that stuff that has been happening, I think, has led to more people wanting to invest in town and stay downtown. So, but during this time, Mindy has had that building for sale. They employ 20 people there. Part of a vibrant downtown or a thriving downtown is to have people working there that live, work, and play downtown. So from just a perspective of some of the things that it might go against the ordinance, I mean, just from high-level reading, it does meet a lot of them. But I think when you look at what are we really after as a community, what do we want to see? I think if you would ask somebody last year or year and a half ago, hey, we're going to fix up these buildings, I think people would have done cartwheels down Kemp Avenue. And I am a fan of the ordinance because that gets away from what we wanted to, steel buildings, different things. So I think going this route is the correct route to have this discussion of, do I wish that everybody could brick their building so it looks like Town Players? Yeah, Town Players is a beautiful building. The Goss is beautiful, but there's some reality in pricing and construction, and also feasibility of doing that. What you find out sometimes isn't feasible either, just because it won't last or cost effective. So from our perspective in developing downtown and being kind of spearheading some of that, we think this would be a good project to obviously update Broadway. A lot of focus has been on Kemp, but there's been some now Broadway activity with the lofts and now this potentially happening. I'm not sure if there's been any feedback from existing property owners. I know I was copied on an email from one of them. So that's where I think I'm at on it. I'll be around for any questions, but just want to know that the support of downtown and what, as a community, that we've been trying to do, be really a shame if we can't get this across the finish line for what I think variances are good, but I think there's also some reality to what we're trying to do in real life and people trying to invest in buildings and make them better. I think this project makes that street better at the end of the day. So thank you.
Stacy, I have a question for you.
Yes.
The building on the north side of the Town Players, is that like Dan's computer place or something like that?
Yes.
Is that an historical building also?
I don't believe so. They're all within the district, and the district was established, I believe it was back in 1989. So it's been established for quite some time, and that 11.1 review process has been established for quite some time as well. I think it was in 1988 was when that came on. However, our overlay district, it has some of the same features as what SHPO is looking for, although it's altogether different and less technical in nature than what SHPO would be looking for. And as Mr. Vaughn, I alluded to, this is a board's decision tonight on the overlay district requirements. And then the SHPO process will need to, per state's law anyway, transpire and go through the process. And then if the applicant does not like the recommendation of SHPO, it can be heard up by the city council, and then they have the ultimate decision-making authority whether to issue the permit as the applicants proposed.
Did you hear back from any of the adjacent landowners from when you sent letters for this variance?
I have not.
And so if this would have been done 2 years ago, we wouldn't have had these ordinances and it would have just been straight to SHPO and it would have never came before us, is that correct? Heads are nodding yes for the people online that listening in. The public hearing is still open if there's anyone else that wishes to speak on this item or,
Mr. Chair,
yes?
so just so I understand that the proposed construction facade meets everything within our overlay district with the exception of the cornices and some of the historic character aspect. Is that correct, as they're proposing?
Basically, yes.
I mean, as far as the type of materials being used, the windows and that kind of stuff.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. I did want to speak just quickly about the cost. There are grants available and low interest loans that are available through the State Historic Preservation Office as well. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Stacy, this is Ford. I thought in the recap that you gave that the Drive It and Teak siding that they're proposing does not meet the historical aspect of the district.
Well, that's where you can have a certain amount of certain types of materials. The teak is very modern, and that does appear to be a bit of an issue. But here again, I'm going to let Brandy weigh in. She's a little bit more familiar with the requirements of the district, but the teak definitely is, it's not characteristic of the district in terms of maintaining and restoring existing facades. So I would consider this project to be modern, using modern materials rather than looking to restore existing. So there is that component.
And to expand on that too, the teak material would meet our ordinance because it's not a prohibited material. The parts that, and we had worked with the applicant on this about the percentage of the metal, and so the awning will be metal, but it is less than 15%, so that does meet the aesthetic requirements. And then the Drive It material is okay as long as it's above the first 12 feet of the building. And I believe that she did change that to meet that ordinance. So as far as otherwise, the two variances that we're looking at is just because staff doesn't want to make the call. It's a little arbitrary of what the board wants to see. And then also to have the public hearing and have the community discussion.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to look at these designs, and that is another reason why we are here. So the board can weigh in on that in terms of if this project is meeting the to retain existing facades in the downtown district. Does this project maintain existing facades in the downtown district? And does this project maintain and restore existing facades, trim, cornices, or replace with similar replications? So that's why we wanted to pose this question to the board here this evening.
But the only building that is in the historical that the SHPO is concerned about is your original building, number 9, and the other two is no problem?
They have more flexibility in the way that they look at the other two. Because they're considered non-contributing resources. So when something is non-contributing, they're not looking so much at the structure itself with improvements. They're looking more at the nature of how those improvements would affect the overall district. So that's where You know, one of the things that came up with the SHPO review is the more modern materials that don't necessarily match what's going on with the rest of the downtown buildings.
But it appears to me, you know, I'm not arguing or anything, I'm just, this is also new to me too, is it looks like the applicant wants to make 3 buildings into one.
That's correct. That's correct, yes.
All right. I am Melinda Workus. I am the owner of the building, and we are proposing that we would take those 3 buildings and combine them into one. And so, in the process, when we obtained our structural and our code review for the building, one of the recommendations that we got was to have the properties surveyed and made into one legal description. So, no longer going forward would they be 3 separate buildings. In the back of the buildings, which we already have approval for, we are building a garage that will connect all 3 of the properties in the back, and you will exit from all 3 of these structures into one garage. So in the future, separating these back into 3 buildings would be really tough. To be able to do that. And I also wanted you all to know, it's like we did do significant work on obtaining prices on putting brick on the facade of these buildings. To redo the buildings in solid brick, it would be over $300,000 to be able to do that. And then we also ran into issues with the contractors not even wanting to give us a quote, because we would have to dig up the sidewalks, pour footings, then our front of our building would be in the sidewalk. So our building would be 8 feet thicker than it normally is. And so we had 3 contractors come out and work with us on that. None of them would even give us a quote for that large amount of brick. And we also ran into the trouble of when we try to combine the 3 into one, with our brick being painted, it just makes it really hard to do that. And so if we were to put all new brick on 11 and 13, it would cost a lot of money. And the only way to make them really look the same would be to paint all that brick, or have the 2 new buildings that we purchased look way newer and way nicer than our building. And our whole design is that people would enter 9 South Broadway and there is no front door on 11 or 13. So I mean, we did do a lot of work and try to keep that brick structure. I would love to have all 3 buildings be brick if we could afford that.
I'm just gonna throw it out there, is there any way, if what they're worried about is the height, instead of one main height, just have it like the 3 different heights? Could you do something like that, if that's what they're concerned about?
We could sure work with our
And
designer.
still have it look like one building, but just stair step it?
Yeah, I think we would just have to go back to the design process on that to see how that would work. The other problem that we ran into a lot of with the design process is where the buildings joint together. The product that you have on those joining factors, so like if we were to put brick over those joints, really anything but drive it when it gets cold and it gets hot, they say that that brick is going to break. And you can see in the middle building, if you stand outside and you look at it, the top of that middle building is back a good 6 inches at the top from one side to the other side, where it is moved over time. And so when you try to lay brick across that surface, that was kind of the issue we ran into with that. That is all I had, unless anybody had any questions for us on.
But what about like the walls there, or is it one wall or is it 2 walls that are put together on the buildings?
2.
2 walls, so then to tie them together, you're gonna have to do a lot of work on the inside too, and.
The wall between 11 and 13 South Broadway, we just did the raw openings on the inside. We have the permit for the interior work, and it was 20 inches between those 2 buildings of solid concrete. Yeah. So, and the other thing, and it's not relevant to the front, but the 3rd building, so the 13 South Broadway, back in the day, that building was a Federal Reserve safety deposit box location. And we're going to make it back into that. So there is an actual vault in that room. We kept the vault door in there. And we ordered some antique safety deposit boxes to put in there to kind of keep that historic piece of those buildings. The middle building was originally the Watertown Public Opinion. Yeah, and our building was a shoe store. So, all right.
So you are going to try and tie some of the Watertown history into the buildings?
Definitely, definitely. In fact, we've kind of worked on some ways on the interior of each building. We've gotten some like photos from Christine at the Historical Society to tie into each one of those rooms, and we actually thought we would maybe have the Public Opinion building, the Safety Deposit Box building, and our building was a shoe store. So.
Thank you for that. Is there any questions for the applicant, or is there anyone else that wishes to speak on this topic? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing and ask for a motion and a second from the board.
I'll make a motion to approve to get the conversation going.
Second, Colleen.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on this item?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Case.
this is, it's a very difficult situation. We've got somebody that wants to improve their property, and trying to enhance the city downtown area. On the flip side, we do have this rule that's less than a year old that talks about the specific historical aspects and trying to protect and preserve them. The issue for me really comes down to is, even if we say yes to the variance of our two sections of our ordinance, there's still the SHPO review process, which in this instance, I think if you take a look at the flow chart, it's going to get down to the bottom box. In my professional life, I know where SHPO is on all these things, and the city is going to have to make a final determination that there are no feasible and prudent alternatives available. At which time the city council is going to have to make that determination, since they're the decision body. And so the question becomes, would the city council want to rely on us as the planning commission, and from a recommendation standpoint, to give them direction as well? So that complicates what we're doing here. While it's not completely germane to the variance request in front of us, it does make me pause for a moment to figure out, we say yes to this, and then subsequently 30, 60, 90 days from now, the city council is going to have to be making a determination on feasibility and prudent alternatives, and they're going to be looking for us for guidance in that regard as well, I'm guessing. And so that's kind of where I think, in my mind, the discussion's at in my head. If we move forward and saying that we're okay with this, we think it's an improvement for what's there, and while it's not consistent with the section of the ordinance, we should probably somehow caution that with provisions of advice to the city council, because they're the ones that's going to ultimately have to make that determination.
I actually have a question. Stacy, do you know, what would be acted on tonight, would that be a part of the case study that would go to SHPO?
No, not necessarily. There's a set of standards and a list of criteria And I know that I have a scheduled appointment with the applicant to work on that tomorrow, actually, and to kind of go through that criteria. While we could certainly pass along the information, it wouldn't necessarily be part of the case report, because the case report has the standards that are set, and I didn't put that particular attachment in, but I believe those are administrative rule standards that are basically national standards.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is Ford. I have a question for Matt. Since this is a Board of Adjustment action, if the board should approve this or deny it, either way, and the applicant wanted our decision changed, would not the applicant have to go through the court system, and the city council would not have any say in our decision?
That's correct. Yeah, yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
But I think that there's two kind of simultaneous paths being required to be pursued here. So first, it has to pass muster with our own ordinances or receive a variance. And it also needs to go through the SHPO process. The SHPO process is what is the process in which the city council has an explicit role laid out by statute. So there's kind of two parallel processes, but you're correct. If they disagree with this decision, appeal from this decision goes to the circuit court.
Mr. Chair, question, was the local historic preservation commission, provided this plan prior to it coming to us?
Not specifically. That will come later within the SHPO review process, because I do believe the Cottington County Historical Society will be in charge of having a public meeting if it goes to the point of getting the case report submitted. And I believe that they'll weigh in along with SHPO at that particular point in time.
But wouldn't it be important to know that if we have an ordinance that specifies we are wanting to preserve cornices and things like that, and if the local historic preservation commission would be supportive of that prior to us, wouldn't that be valuable information for us as a Board of Adjustment to determine whether or not, if our local historic preservation people are saying we don't want you to do this, it'd be nice to know that statement where they're at going into this decision.
I agree, and that's almost something that, when we were creating this ordinance, it was a community decision, and it would have been nice to specifically have their input. But then just going back to it's kind of, any ordinance that's created is a work in progress, and so if there's things that need to change along the way, if we do get their input or what's determined with this application, there's always amendments that can be made.
But we did not reach out to the Cottington County Historical Preservation regarding this request.
Not on this particular request, no. Staff could do that if the board would so choose to want to table. We could certainly do that if that's the way the board would like to go.
Yeah, and to that point, Commissioner Case, simply because it's not part of the laid out process right now, we didn't bring a formal recommendation from that committee. So to Brandy's point, I think if that is something that this board would like to have, it can easily be incorporated via an amendment to this ordinance. And then that way, staff has clearer direction to get a formal recommendation from another body before bringing it forward to you.
Especially when we're talking about the different heights. If you want to have them staggered or something like that, maybe they could work with the applicant and come up with a few more ideas and try and work it that way.
I agree, this is Ford, with trying to get some other input from experts in the area, and we do have them on that commission. I personally feel that if we would approve this variance tonight, we're effectively gutting our downtown, our DT overlay district. And I would like to see something that was more, not quite so modern, more of a compromise of some way, and perhaps the local commission could help with that.
I agree with you
I would agree with Todd,
100%,
it's a
but
very
it would be
difficult
so hard
situation
to.
that we're in.
I agree 100%, Diana, but it would be so hard to tie the three of them and make them look like they're one legal description, one building.
Chair, Liam Cohen.
Go ahead, Liam.
Thanks. I want to talk real briefly about sort of my thoughts generally on the overlay district and this particular application for variance. You know, my recollection, and I sat through all the overlay discussions on the plan commission side, you know, it was generally, obviously we want to retain the historic aspects where we can, and it's certainly sad to lose cornices, natural brick. I'm not real excited about that or moving that forward. And I'm also not excited about issuing a variance so close to issuing or to creating this overlay district. But that being said, my recollection of the overall purpose was so we didn't have any pole sheds downtown, right? I mean, there was an issue a while back, I think it's probably been 2 or 3 years ago, where we had a new building construction, and there was, I think it's lap siding or steel siding is what you'd call it, and it's downtown, right? And this is in the context as a city generally where we're trying to promote development downtown, promote redevelopment, promote development of vacant spaces. You know, meanwhile, the harbor burns down and we get a very modern looking building, a very nice looking building downtown that contains a lot of these facade type things. All of this is kind of going on at the same time. So while I agree with the historical aspect and trying to preserve it, you know, personally, I have to look at this every single day when I get out of my truck. For the next 30 or 40 years while I work as an attorney, I'll be looking at this building. Personally, it doesn't bother me. The height differential doesn't bother me. Certainly saddened by the loss of the brick on the 9 Broadway building, but I think overall it's a better improvement, or it's a net improvement, absolutely. And more importantly, we as a city, perhaps maybe not specifically this commission, but as a city, we're working very hard to promote development and redevelopment downtown. The Watertown Development Company does an incredible job. You know, and as a strategy generally, that's been our strategy to push folks downtown, right? You know, to try to limit the growth on the fringes, limit infrastructure expenses on the fringes of the city. And I think if we, you know, don't allow this project to go through, we really kind of snuff out exactly what we've been trying to promote. So I guess that's kind of where I leave it off at. At the end of the day, all things being equal, I think we should do it because I don't want to end up completely snuffing out all we've tried to accomplish.
Thank you for that. And to kind of add on that, I know this is our first variance request in this particular overlay district, but we have other overlay districts with building standards, and it kind of follows the same. We have building standards, I know, in the Gateway Overlay District, and one of our first few applications came through on that. We kind of had that same approach that Liam just said, whereas, you know, the purpose of this is to ensure that we get something that looks good and is not a pole barn type of thing. And I know a variance was granted in that district, so although it's the first one in this district, we have similar instances in other overlay districts to kind of compare it to.
One thing that I just wanted to add as staff, and this is definitely in front of the board for your decision, I just want to bring up the fact of looking at a short-term improvement to improve a building versus looking at the long-term community impact of, is this the best design for the building within this particular district in this particular location? So I just wanted to pose that to the board.
This is Ford, and that was exactly what I was thinking, Stacy. I agree with the issues and the thoughts that Leon has just had. This building, I believe, doesn't need to look this modern in order to accomplish what this development, the Workus properties, want to accomplish. We could have a building that does exactly what wants to be accomplished, that doesn't look this modern, that fits a little bit more in with the overall theme of what the buildings that are governed by this downtown overlay district are under. This building is very modern. The outside look is very modern compared to its neighbors. Does it have to be this modern to accomplish what the Workus properties want and what our overlay district lays out?
Diana, I think it's going to look, that's just a rendition and it doesn't look like, but look at the building just on the north side of Town Players. That one looks pretty modern too.
And
Well, be that as it may, it's not such a significant presence on this block as this particular building is. I mean, this is a statement building in the center of this block, and it is going to be the reference point for which other people who are developing buildings downtown will use. They are going to refer to this building. Is this the reference point we want other developers to use? Or do we want the outside of this building to look not quite so modern, to fit in a little bit better with the theme and the flavor of the buildings that are downtown in this district?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I do have the development company's representatives at the podium, and I know I closed the public hearing, but I'll let him speak again.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to come back. So just a couple of quick follow-ups from some discussion referencing Commissioner Kays. I think there's a process laid out, and the variance request, it doesn't do any good to go through all the other steps if the board isn't interested in granting the variance, because there are some still hoops that have to be jumped through. So I think coming out with a decision tonight will help all of us as we work on this project to make sure that there's a possibility of a variance. I think the ordinance has already proven to be beneficial. You've had 5 projects, or are going to have 5 projects that are going to meet this. One had to change what they were doing to meet the ordinance. On Kemp Avenue, they had stucco all the way down, and they had to go replace that with brick. So I think jumping to conclusions that we're already requesting variance on a new ordinance, I think we've had success with that ordinance. And I also want to talk about too, Commissioner Ford kind of brought up a good point, but my counter argument to that is the 2 buildings that are sitting there, and I'm not in any disrespect to any building owner, but that's what people see when they're on Kemp Ave or Broadway right now, is 2 old buildings with some broken windows, some wood. I don't think that's relatively pleasing when we bring people to come and want to invest in downtown either. So I think when you have people investing money, other investment happens, and that's what's happened. I think over the last 5 years before this, there was no activity. So I think this is a slippery slope to require people to, and it's not like we're taking down the Goss or Town Players or another building that has some things. If you look at a per square footage, of what's really changing other than the upper level of the Ledgers building. 99% of it's going to look better than it does right now. And that's not to be a disrespectful way. That's just in a redevelopment situation. So just want to be careful that from an overall standpoint, the work that's been done, the money that's been invested in trying to keep and get people to invest, this decision could be counterproductive to what we've been trying to do. So appreciate the opportunity to come back up. Thank you.
I want to reiterate, Chair, that it's my understanding that even in its modern look, it still complies with all other aspects, with the exception of the cornices and the general historical look. It purports with the overlay district, right?
Yes, it does from the actual percentages of material. It does comply that way, but we are focused in on the number one, retain existing facades is in the downtown district, and number two, maintain and restore existing facades, trim cornices, or replace with similar replications.
Sure, absolutely. And again, the loss of the brick cornices in that upper right-hand corner, it will be a loss overall. It looks great, but in terms of the net impact downtown, the modern issue doesn't bother me at all, and it's going to have a tremendous net impact. And I think when you look closely at the application, you can see that there's an unnecessary or undue hardship that the ordinance creates. So I think we meet the actual textbook requirement to grant the variance. And again, I just really want to reiterate that we've tried really hard now, ever since we had the charrette, whatever it was, 10, 12 years ago, to promote development downtown. And there's been, well, you name it, H2O 2020, the charrette, now with the Watertown Development Company carrying the torch. It would be a grave mistake, I think, when somebody wants to invest 700, 800, 900,000 in our downtown, and we tell them that it doesn't line up with the Skyway, or we're losing whatever it is, 50 or 60 square feet of cornices.
I think one of the things too I wanted to point out, one of the things that's different about this particular project in relation to some of the others that have recently gone up, they do meet the standards, but we're not looking at something that's has historic value already and replacing that those elements on those buildings. So in the case of Parkside and the lofts, they were in the downtown overlay district as well, but they weren't in the same review category because they didn't have an existing facade to be maintained. They didn't have the existing historical facades, trims, cornices, those types of things that this ordinance is mentioning specifically.
We have a motion and we have a second. There's been some good discussion. Is there any other additional discussion you would like to add? Hearing none, I think we're ready for a vote. Stacy, could I get a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ford?
No.
Oletsky?
Yes.
Brink?
Yes.
Culhane?
Yes.
Hanson?
Yes.
Kays? Kays?
I'm sorry. Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to item 5 in the agenda is open public comment. Did we receive any?
No, we did not.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item number 6 is new business. Do we have any new business?
No, we do not.
Okay, moving on to number 7 is any old business. Do we have any old business?
I don't have anything for old business unless someone else does.
Hearing none, I'll move to item 8, which is motion to adjourn. Need a motion in a second?
I'll make that motion to adjourn.
Hanson will second.
I have a motion and a second. Can I get a vote?
Sure. Ford,
Yes.
Aletsky,
Yes.
Culhane,
Yes.
Hanson,
Yes.
Kays,
Yes.
and Brink. Meeting is adjourned.
Okay, we will start the plan commission meeting as soon as we're ready. 5 minutes.